Hello again, everybody. It's myself, Nick Pennsylvania, and I am here as always with Brendan Bond, my good friend, and also we have back with us the person that actually started all this nonsense, our friend Mike, who just goes by Mike, correct?
Yes, that works for me.
Now, it
Hello.
has been a while since you've been on here, and happy to have you back and have a really exciting thing for you both today. I have heard a really good story from a friend of mine, and by really good, I mean really interesting. This is a friend of mine, lives out in the central Pennsylvania region. This is actually a friend of ours whom we have referenced before, I believe, in our last conversation together, Brendan, and that is Zach in Punxy. Now, my friends Zach and Annie, they live out in the Jefferson County area. They recently moved back to the Punxy area. Now, for those of you not in Pennsylvania, Punxy is our abbreviation for Punxsutawney. Many of you may be familiar with Punxsutawney from such spectacles as Groundhog's Day, and I believe too I've referenced that the locals get upset when you refer to it as the Beaver. So Zach and Annie, at this time, this is a little while ago, they've recently moved back to Punxy proper, like I said. At the time that this occurred, though, they were living along a rural highway between two fairly small towns, large towns by Pennsylvania's western and especially Pennsylvania northern tier standards. That said, I'm just going to tell you this story directly as I got it from Zach. I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to share some photos with the two of you. For those of you who are listening, you'll be able to see these photos on our social media things. I don't have anything to do with those. That's strictly Mike and Brendan. Following this, I'm going to go to the two of you, kind of get some of your thoughts. But here is Zach Punxy's story. And again, verbatim. He had shared some photos with me, and here's exactly what he wrote. Well, here's a bit of the backstory with those pictures. So at the old place down back next to the thick brush/tree line, which leads to a large plot of timber for miles, I had a garden area, compost area, and on several occasions I would hear something large, maybe 50 yards or less, shifting around in the brush. Of course, rational me says, oh, it's just a deer, or at worst a black bear, neither of which would worry me much any. Then came what would sound like grunts, low growls, and stuff of that nature, which sounded like it wasn't really intentional or trying to intimidate me or anything, but it certainly was more than enough to unnerve me. And I'm someone who has encountered black bears pretty up close and personal on more than one occasion. So when this would happen, I would stop what I was doing down there, turning compost or something of that nature, and I would walk back up towards the house, which stood on higher ground, going up there to see if I could see anything. Well, on a couple different occasions, I could see a dark mass, maybe 50 yards back in this incredibly thick brush, but usually the sun would be setting in your face, and it could be written off as maybe it's just some weird shadows, or who knows. I even went and got Annie a few times, and she would also confirm that, yes, it looks like there's something in there. Maybe it's moving a little, but nothing enough to say one way or another. So one day I'm down in the garden, and sure enough, I hear these faint grunts, etc., and I of course retreat upwards to the house, feeling a bit uneasy, and yet again, it looks as if there is some kind of dark mass back in there, but with the sun in your face, there wasn't much to be seen in detail, so hence I tried snapping a picture or two, and just so happens that one of the kids came running out, or someone pulled in, or whatever. It was something else took my attention away from it entirely, for the time being. Well, a few months later, I'm going through photos on my phone and deleting to make space when I come across a photo or two I snapped when having this phenomenon go on, and I decide to take a look, and sure enough, on close inspection, I find what you see here in the photos. Make what you will of that, because I can't explain it. Also, to add, our old place is connected to some patch of forest as the kid's grandparents' place, which is just a couple miles away as a close flies. So this large patch of timber, we have been in there and we have experienced some very strange and off-putting phenomenon. But that's it in short. What I see in the photo is a bit unnerving. Maybe it's my bias towards the whole thing, but honestly, tell me what you make of it. To add more, if that was indeed anything back in those woods, it would have to be nearly 7 feet tall to be standing where it was. Now, the topography, it's a slight grade downhill, and there's also some pretty bad stagnant water that me or you would be up to our knees or hips in. And frankly, it would make swamp water seem elegant. I'd feel more comfortable if there wasn't anything there. Now, also, he adds, I don't know how versed you are on the subject, but it is a theory based from similar photographic evidence and with other primates that their skin, especially when in the sun, can reflect colors around, making their skin appear green in a lot of cases. So that was my friend Zach's story. His comment about the skin iridescence turning green depending on how the sun's hitting and everything was kind of something that we were grappling with, talking about. But before we go any further, I need to share these photos with the two of you. Okay, so here's the first photo, and he zooms in a little bit, so I'm going to zoom in on it too. Now, the area in concern is this. You see that dark area?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can zoom in on it a little bit. You can kind of see eyes and a nose there.
Yeah, that's cool.
Let me bring up one of Zach's other photos where he had zoomed in, but here's where he circled that. And again, you can kind of see a black mass. Okay. So I was looking at this, and as Zach referenced, he said, maybe it's my bias. Maybe it's because I was hearing these things and I'm kind of uneasy right now. And this has happened a few times. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there. He certainly said he'd feel a lot better if there weren't anything there. I see it, and I can definitely see the facial features that he's talking about, but I don't know. I feel like we do these sort of things a lot. I believe Dr. Michael Shermer refers to this as our pattern-seeking behavior, patternicity, our desire to see, to personify objects and see things in them. I don't know. It reminds me a lot of another person we reference a lot, Tim Renner, in his photo from Back on Toad Road that appears on the back of his book Beyond the Seventh Gate. It is a spooky looking photo. It definitely looks like there's some sort of facial thing there. Is it an illusion? Is it something we're reading into? I don't know. But the photos and the story, I'm very curious to hear what you both thought, what your initial impressions are. And since it's been a while, Mike, how about we start with you?
All right, sounds good. I think it's a really cool photo when you actually get a chance to look at it. No, my only thing that I'm thinking that kind of makes me maybe question if it, like you mentioned, it being like some type of an illusion, is that the tones that you see in the head are pretty consistent with the rest of the picture, as far as like if maybe you can go to the other one that's bigger. So like whenever I first seen this picture, I was more focused on the darker spot beneath, which I guess would be like the shoulder or chest area, because the area above where the face is at, the colors really blend in with a lot of the other colors you see throughout the photo. But I mean, when you see that face, that looks like a face, and it looks like it's looking, I almost would say it's smiling at the camera. I mean, it looks like you can see the cheek lines. And I mean, it's consistent in some of the reports of Bigfoot where you have a flatter nose. So it's a really interesting image. Like the way it blends in is the only thing that really makes me question. I mean, obviously, I don't know its authenticity because it's authentic. We know who took it, but the fact that it's actually what we're thinking it might be, that would be the only real red flag that I'm seeing. But the face is so convincing. What do you think, Brendan?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. First off, super cool story. I really am excited to actually hear more about the other strange things that happen in the woods, because I think this might be one of those sum of the parts kind of stories where everything together kind of leads instances like this. Now, looking at the photo itself, this is one where personally I don't see anything actually, which is rare. Usually I'm picking this stuff out pretty well along with other folks. When it comes to matrixing or pareidolia, oh, that's what you guys are saying the face is? Okay, I don't see it at all. I see there's definitely so okay.
Erase that so you can see it.
Yeah.
You don't see that.
I mean I don't see it at all. Like, so this is a good example. I mean, usually like I'm the one who's like defending these kind of photos in a lot of cases. But
for those of you not witnessing this live, I am in fact drawing fanciful hairs on the image right now.
We're gonna have to start posting these videos, unfortunately, I think. But just so you folks know, like, again, you will be able to find these photos both Instagram and on Facebook to make it a little easier. And again, thank you very much for Zach for allowing us to do that, because everyone has an opinion, like us here.
Everyone has an opinion. It invites those opinions, and it invites more people to that you'd be comfortable sharing.
Exactly. That is a brave thing, Zach, and we salute you for that, and thank you. I definitely think there's something in the photo. Whenever I first looked at it, I thought, yeah, because you can see whatever we're looking at here is darker than the shadows in other parts of the photo. So it's not like just a tree stump or something, and it's darker than the other shadows. So therefore, like, I think there is something absolutely in the photo. But yeah, I personally don't see the face in this instance.
Did you try squinting?
Yeah. But again, it's one of those things. But I think this is an excellent example of, some people see stuff, some people don't. Like Nick mentioned the back of Tim Renner's first major book, at least. I saw the face there right away. I've shown that book to other people, and some people don't see it at all either, so I think that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. I think the story that goes along with it makes it a lot more interesting too.
Yeah, one thing I would like to do real quick, because Zach had mentioned in his story, and I kind of skipped over a couple sentences that weren't adding up. It was because of the back and forth that we were having in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pull up just kind of an aerial to give an idea of what the lay of the land, what the topography of the region is. So in a moment, I'll pull that up for the two of you. Now, again, those of you who are listening are not going to be able to see that, but we will try to describe exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So, Mike, what other thoughts are? Oh, I'm sorry. Go on, Brendan.
I was going to say, while you're pulling that up, I had a few other thoughts initially on the story. I could definitely relate to Zach with the grunts that he was hearing on occasion. Now, we have around our house, we have lots of deer around here. Deer make really weird grunting noises that sound sometimes much bigger and much more intimidating than what it is, which might just be like an 80-pound doe. But that's what it is when you hear it, kind of thing. So I think the fact that Zach pointed out that he's like, I've heard, like, he's familiar with the sounds that the native animals make, and this stood out. I think that's kind of the key thing, is that it's something that stands out as anomalous. Doesn't necessarily mean it's paranormal, but it's not normal for his backyard. And just like the overall, when he talks about the feelings and everything that he was getting, like, that isn't usually what people associate with like their backyard. Like, when things are off, it makes sense that he would be kind of like sensing that and feeling that. But also it makes sense that he would shake it off so quickly whenever like his kids come around or someone's in the front yard or something. Like, it's not crazy enough that turns into a big thing. It's just like, things are a little off.
Yeah, and looking at the aerial view of the region, I can see where again he and Annie and their two kids they moved back to the Punxy area proper. Again, we're looking down upon a rural highway where you can see there's some game lands, there's some campgrounds, a lot of forested area. We have some well pads in the vicinity.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing looking at this, Nick, is this could literally be anywhere in most parts of Pennsylvania. It's very much
typical sites
here, and it's something you hear. Yeah, and it's something you hear all the time whenever you talk about, you know, paranormal activity in certain areas. You know, people say if you're going with the flesh and blood hypothesis, with, you know, saying this is like a Bigfoot or something like that, people say, oh well, they would need tons of space. According to the where a lot of these sightings are happening, not really. There's usually wooded areas, but a lot of times they're in places like this where you're talking, you know, patches of what, maybe a few hundred to a few thousand acres, which really isn't that much land when you think about it compared to some other areas.
I think that's what kind of makes it's, you know, for skeptics, that's a big red flag too, is that they don't have a lot of space in the area, and there's a lot of sightings around here, or
absolutely,
the Western Pennsylvania area. Yeah, something I thought was interesting is that that he mentioned the green Keller, or the green. What you say? It wasn't like Keller; it was more like, you know, a green shade to it.
When he was describing it, I was thinking, because he specifically said the way the light hits and everything, it made me think that he was talking about there's an iridescence. And that may be one of the reasons. I mean, it's an explanation for an explanation. It may be one of the reasons why so many photos can appear distorted and whatnot. And there may be something to that, especially if you're taking it with not the greatest camera, or in this case, and is more and more common the case when you're taking it with your phone and whatnot, you're not in ideal situations. And as he said, he just kind of turned around and snapped a few of the land behind him. Brendan, you're a photo guy.
Yeah, no, I was about to just agree with both of you on that account. I thought that it was really interesting that he brought that up. You hear a lot of crazy things in relation to Bigfoot and everything. I don't know if I've ever heard someone bring up the idea of iridescence, because that's actually that's, as far as like them being hard to pick up on camera, that's a very grounded reason. If that is the case, if there is an iridescence to their hair or their skin, light does really weird things. And when you try and capture it on camera, it does even weirder things. And when you're in suboptimal conditions, it's a miracle anything turns out at all. I think the situation which he took the photo under would explain some of it, but I don't know. It kind of leads me to think that I wonder if he has had other possible sightings of this thing, where that green kind of comes in. That sounds like a theory that he has, which is, I think, fascinating. I've never heard it before.
It's not his own theory. He did tell me, and I'll have a quick thought, Mike, and then I definitely want to give it over to you. It's not his own theory, but it's one he subscribes to. And again, I feel like a lot of things can become further fetched as we try to make explanations for explanations, which is something we've talked about before. And Zach and I even talked about, you know, the whole interdimensional thing, which you, Brendan, and Brian have gotten into before.
Yes.
we both think like that's just a bridge too far. It's trying to create, it's like imaginary solutions or real solutions to imaginary problems, or something pataphysical like this. The iridescent thing, that is not unknown in nature. Like that's a thing. There's precedent set. So is it too far for me? No. Am I totally believing there's like a Bigfoot thing? No. But as an explanation goes, that's one that can hold some water for me. Mike?
Okay, so I mean, what I was thinking as soon as I heard about the green, say this were a flesh and blood creature living in the woods, probably not bathing properly. I mean, it could be mold, you know, some type of growth on its actually hair or fur, and even at that, it could be, you know, almost intentional, because I mean, if say these are intelligent creatures, it would be some type of like camouflage,
like a ghillie suit.
Oh yeah, it was a similar idea, right? I mean, so that was just one of the things I had thought about whenever I heard the green.
Yeah, it's something I think that's interesting, and I think it's interesting how like these things kind of, when you hear a description, sometimes things like that kind of like just like pop to you, and can lead you down some interesting paths. Like one of the things I thought too when he mentioned the green was why are we assuming this is a Bigfoot and not some sort of a green man, like the motif of the pagan Pan, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, which you could argue that Bigfoot and Sasquatch is just like, you know, another representation of that. But I think it's interesting that he said like it's a swampy area, is like a very I hate to just play bingo here with the things we talk about, but it's a very liminal kind of transitionary space. And it's interesting that you have this possibly paranormal stuff happening right in that area. It just, so everything about the story so far I really, really love, and it makes you think about so many other different connections, and it has a lot of those beats that we always talk about and other things, I think, in a good way.
I had one more thought on the initial story here. Something I thought was interesting, beyond having the grunts and seeing the dark shapes in the woods, which were all, pretty, common occurrences when it comes to Bigfoot sightings, especially. Would this be a habitual excitement? No, what's the?
No, you're right. Yeah, it's a habitual sighting, or there's a habituation happening, as in these things
living
more than once. Yeah.
Right. Well, and in his story too, Zach talks about, he opened up by saying sometimes when he was out there, he would hear these things, and and again, he has another story that he and I are going to sit down and record together, so you can hear it from Zach's distinctive tone, his other encounter, as he calls it.
So anyway, what I thought was kind of interesting is he wasn't out there trying to prove that this was Sasquatch. Actually, he was doing the opposite. He was trying to like disprove for himself, and it seemed like he was trying to find like every possible scenario besides it actually being what all the signs were pointing to it being. And I thought that was
I think he was really out there doing some gardening at first.
Trying to.
You're onto something there, Mike, by saying like this is a situation where, we always talk about the co-creative element. We talk about being primed for certain things. And it's certainly worth noting that there is a difference between people going out and looking for these things in one way, shape, or form, and someone just working in their backyard and having some weird things happen. It's a different setting and worth noting.
But I will say that if you're going out there deliberately to look for something and you're looking for things to confirm what you're trying to prove, or you are not believing of it, but you're still terrified of it, you know what I mean? You say you don't believe, but you still act really terrified of it. I think those are two very similar places to be. Well, it's like we talked about ghost things, and I'm like, I don't believe. I'm terrified of it. I'm still running out of the room. Have I behaved any differently as a result of that?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that in the act of hunting, there is a certain level of intention and ritual that possibly can change how you're interacting with the environment enough that it predisposes either things to happen or for us to interpret the world around us through those intentions and rituals. Now, that being said, I think that's more about the setting and why you're there. When the things happen, I think you're absolutely right. Like if something happens and it scares you and you're leaving, whether or not you believe in ghosts or Bigfoot or not, you're still having that visceral reaction.
I think that's something that you need to spend some time and flesh out your thought as clearly as you can, because you have an idea there that I think is interesting, but I'm not entirely sure I'm following you on that. When you're talking about if you're going out deliberately, you're going to be presenting some sort of ritual that's going to affect your interpretation. Because again, I hear those words. I feel like that's a good thing that you need to spend some more time fleshing out, because when I hear it, I'm thinking, well, yes, but even though I don't believe in this, my fear of it is still driving me away. My fears are still presenting an interpretation. It's the subtext which is informing how I'm experiencing this moment right now.
I definitely see what you're saying. One of the ways I might be able to describe, again, without really sitting with it and fleshing it out, like you said, which is good advice. One way that I could maybe remove it from the paranormal field, that maybe is a better analogy, kind of gets into some of the stuff we've talked to before about perception. And I think those same ideas of ritual and intent affect us whenever we're not, doing paranormal stuff. One of the things I think of is, I think something all three of us can relate to. Remember when all of us used to skateboard a lot, and you would just be driving down the road and you would just see like a spot and just go, that's a good spot. Like that's a good ledge. That's a good stair. That's a good curb, kind of whatever.
I've nearly wrecked my car on multiple occasions, as have you. When you see a stream and you're like, certainly trout live in that.
Yeah.
It looks too fishy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It looks too good. Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's a better example. I guess what I'm trying to say is whenever you're even your subconscious sometimes will direct how you kind of interact with the situation. I think that there's two parts to it. There's when you're going into a space and existing in a space, then reacting to a thing happening are two different things. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, but I'm also kind of going in circles right now. So
I think something else
too. I think that's what you need to build on when you're going in with looking for something versus when you're reacting to something. I'm sorry, Mike, go right ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that, with what Brennan just said, say you are looking for something, it's not necessarily an umbrella where it's going to cover anyone. I mean, because like, say you are a new, and we're talking about like a ghost hunter or something, right? Say you were a new ghost hunter and you were investigating somewhere and suddenly, things are happening. You don't have the experience for how to deal with that. So you would start operating off of adrenaline and whatever else is going to kick in, as opposed to somebody who's been through this over and over and over again. A good example would be recently we were at the bus stop and one of the moms there had a seizure, and out of nowhere. How I reacted to it versus how my neighbor, who is a police officer, reacted to it were two completely different things.
Oh my gosh!
I mean? That emergency situation. He is more. He's used to dealing with it, whereas I was like panicking, running around in circles, basically. So, just my 2 cents.
Well, I mean, first off, I hope she's okay.
She's fine. Yeah, she's fine.
Well, that's good. That's good. No, but you're right. I think that's a good example. Like he was like, when stuff happens, the subconscious part of our brain a lot of times takes over, and how we have treated those situations previously, whether we're familiar with them or not, definitely has something to do with it. And, we do talk about like the idea of vibes and things like that, and how you get certain feelings about certain things. Get a good feeling about somebody and you don't have a good reason why. I think it's possible that there's a lot of micro cues and little things going on that a part of our subconscious, the really old part of our brain, is making those determinations like behind the scenes almost, and then slowly kind of feeding it to us, that allows us to have those kind of reactions. You're going to say, Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel that I can accurately describe some of Zach's feelings as where he's going. He's, again, as Mike points out, he wasn't out hunting for this sort of thing. Zach has expressed to me that he's not sure how he feels. He believes there's something going on only because he's had multiple experiences in the woods. And Zach is not unlike ourselves in the sense that he has spent a lot of time out in the woods through work and through youth. I mean, Zach has grown up through, Eastern Kentucky and into Pennsylvania, very much familiar with the woods of Appalachia and the goings on in it. And he's very big into, he says gardening, but he's really big into permaculture and foraging for wild edibles in the woods and such. So he is he's not an expert but he has it beyond the common person's grasp of what's out there in the woods and whatnot. And he's kind of one of the reasons why I was talking to him about this is he's led to me about he's had these experiences and sometimes he's uncomfortable, and it's just so I think there's the uncertain, the unknown, and I'm sure the subtext, the things that he's read, the stories that he's heard growing up feed into like he's supplanting the unknown with these stories, which I think is what I was describing when I say like, yeah, I don't know. I probably don't believe in ghosts. I think it's pretty far-fetched, but scared as hell, because I see the unknown aspect and I'm filling it with all of these stories, improbable, probable, and otherwise.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And just even like what you said there at the end, whether improbable or not, our brain is going to make those judgment calls for us. And like you said, Zach sounds like he has, a lot of experience and everything in the woods and just outdoors in general. So when he says something is different, that's an educated comment he's making. It's not just an off the cuff kind of thing.
Right. And it makes me think too, it's just, this goes back to the whole thing that our emotions and our emotional reactions to things are an elephant. And our reasoning is an impotent rider upon that elephant, in which we react to things instinctively and emotionally. And it's usually our reason comes in to try to explain why, and not the other way around. We're not leading with reason. We're usually leading, you keep going back to the instinctive but also the emotional. Mike?
Something I was thinking about when you guys were just going through this, doesn't necessarily pertain to this specific event. And Brennan, I'm not like calling you out, but it kind of like, you hear of a story, and one of the common things for people to say would be like, well, this is probably a bear, or it's probably a deer grunting, which is what Brendan had first initially mentioned. I mean, most people are going to be able to, like, we know what bears look like, taught all through grade school. Most people around here are going to know what it sounds like when a deer is grunting. It's just kind of like common things that I don't often go to that, because I just don't feel like that people are making that mistake. As much as skeptics or people who, I'm also a healthy skeptic, but I just feel like that's often a go-to conclusion.
Well, and I agree with you, and Brendan and I have talked about this before in other conversations. We don't want to presume ignorance on people, but at the same time, I mean, we live in an area where those sort of encounters is much more common than,
right.
And we're giving Zach this credit too. I know Zach knows what deer and bears sound like. But if somebody out in, say, like Columbus, Ohio, is telling me this story, I'm going to feel very different. If somebody is out in New Mexico is telling me this story, I'm going to feel very different, because, again, I don't know all the wildlife that's out in the American West. And we grew up in a certain place and in a certain way where those encounters were much more common. So I think we take it for granted. And I think you're right to take it for granted that most of the people, I'd say, around us are familiar with those sounds, especially those who grew up like us, being in the woods, possibly being involved in hunting and fishing, camping, and those outdoor things. I don't know how representative our experiences are to the general population.
I mean, that's probably a good point. You guys would, Nick, you would know better than I would, because you are a little bit more travel than I am, but it's just something I hear that and I think, like, I mean, that's another one of it's like a convenient excuse, but to me it's not really proof,
Yeah, I agree with you, and I like how you're saying, like, let's not just assume that people are stupid,
right?
But
yes,
and at the same time, sure, of course, it does make things easier, doesn't it? But let's also talk about our old friend priming. And if you're already ramped up, like, I remember, because I was walking to see you, Mike. I was a teenager, and I was walking through the cemetery on the hill at dusk, and from behind the bushes, a huge racket, and I was scared to death. I saw a rabbit. Now, normally, we all know the sounds bunnies make, right? But in that moment, I'm in the cemetery, it's dusk, I want to walk as quickly as I can. Big racket, as I flushed a rabbit out from the brush right next to the road there. And I saw a rabbit, and I was so scared. Now, of course, I identified it as a rabbit, but there was like a full second where it didn't matter, And so if you only had that second, it very well could have been a bear. And we removed from that emotional response could go, well, it was probably a bear, but we weren't there and we weren't already kind of stirred up emotionally. So I can still go back to those sort of things but again, taking the weight off the person who's sharing that story and being somewhat empathetic and understanding that, again, we respond emotionally, we respond instinctively. That we are the inheritors of the people that responded instinctively even when the threat wasn't real, because the people that didn't respond usually didn't respond when the threat was real, and those genes just don't pass on.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to be clear, whenever I was mentioning the, does can make some pretty crazy sounding grunts, I was using that to just say that there are some weird noises out there, but given Zach's history, I assume he can in fact tell the difference. But I completely agree with you, Mike, that is used all the time as a like an excuse, for scouting to say, oh, it's probably this. But I'd say on the same side that like we're giving people the benefit of the doubt that they can identify these things as generally. Let me finish this thought real quick. We generally give people that benefit. But I think it is important that we call that we are giving people that benefit, because I would love to know if anyone has ever tested that. And this is maybe something we look into. If I took 40 sounds from native mammals of different sizes and gave them to people who are supposedly outdoorsy like ourselves, I don't know how many of them I would get right. Can I tell the difference between a mink and a fox and a ghost? I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to find out how much. Yeah, the average things. I don't know. That's just. I think it's important that we call out that we are giving people, that we are presuming something one way or the other.
Well, but I've had this test. Had this test.
I'd love to hear how this went. Then I'm curious.
Well, it went. Okay. Here's the story. Some people might be familiar with where I'm talking about. I used to work in an office. I worked with Brian, who, of course, our friend, who we've had on the show quite a few times, and who's going to be a bit jealous, Mike, that he wasn't here when Bigfoot was being discussed or potential. But do you all remember there was a few years ago, there was some song about what foxes say and whatnot, and there was all sorts of obnoxious sounds. They played it at the hockey games up in Erie all the time back then. Bottom line was, I worked in this office. One of the secretaries was playing these sounds for people and having them guess what it was, because she thought it was the wildest sound ever. And so somebody went into the back. I had my own private office in the way back. No one hardly knew when I was there. It was wonderful. Somebody come grab me. They're like, I bet Nick would know. So they bring me up, and this lady's like, okay, you ever hear this? And then she plays it. She tells me what that is. And it was like my best Mark Trail moment. I'm like, well, yeah, that's a fox. And they were stunned. And now, again, most everybody there kind of grew up in the same region. And, and I heard a fox right away. And it was a fox, because despite what that song would have you believe, foxes, Brendan, what does a fox sound like in the woods, especially when you're walking alone at night?
I'm not going to do it. I almost did. I'm not going to do it.
It sounds like a woman screaming.
Yeah, it sounds like death. It's awful.
It'll shake you up.
Sure. But so and I'm not sure how that test would go, but we have a few friends that work in the outdoor industries, and I might see if there is such a thing, because as much as we'd like to think I would like to think I would do well on it, I don't know. I'm just saying it is in fact a presumption.
Well, Brendan,
our friend Aaron would know, and
I might have to. Yeah, I might have
Let's
to.
do it.
That might be my homework for the week.
Let's do it.
Well,
but I think it's an excellent point to bring up, Mike.
And what's funny is, without giving away too much information, my wife actually, works with editing books, and she does like romance novels. Where's that? Oh, there's a little Bigfoot, because apparently these came in the mail today. Apparently, one of the romance novels has Bigfoot in it. So I'm just saying this is right behind me. And
are these romance books?
He's not great. I don't know where it goes in the book. That's a question I haven't
asked. Oh my gosh, that's
sure
very cool though. So it's a very cool.
I'll point out he's not green. He's brown.
He's not green. Now there have been. This is again the third time we're going to mention Tim Renner. Tim Renner specifically has a few Bigfoot accounts recorded of green Bigfoots.
Oh,
so
really? Okay.
Green Bigfoots apparently are a thing.
Well, after you mentioned the green man, that element, which I wasn't thinking about. I mean, that's pretty an interesting connection there, because they do kind of allude to that being potentially Sasquatch as well.
Well, yeah, if we're talking about old gods of Appalachia,
right.
We're in the right spot,
Well, if you're in the right spot and you have photos of a potential green Bigfoot man, whatever, hey, Mike, do you still know how people can reach out to us?
I believe it's theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. Is that right?
Survey says.
You got it. A+ for Mike.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.